Good day, grade 11s. Welcome to Mindset Learn Extra. Today we're going to focus on geometric optics. This is a very nice practical section where we go and we look at lenses and the impact that lenses have on our everyday life. Now, a lot of us know people that wear glasses, contact lenses, or you might be someone that wear them yourself. So when we work with this section, we're going to look at how those lenses impact our eyesight and they actually benefit us in overcoming problems that you might have. When we look at geometric optics, we're going to focus on the following topics. We're going to look at images that are formed by different lenses, as well as the uses of the lenses. Now, when we talk of the different lenses, we differentiate between two types of lenses. When we talk about a lens, we refer to any transparent material that has got a curved side. Now, these must be at least one curved surface that we are talking about. When we work with lenses, we've got two different types of lenses. The first type is known as a converging or a convex lens. Now, if we go and we look at the properties, converging lenses tend to converge light rays towards each other. This means that they bend the light rays so that they meet at a specific point beyond the lens, beyond or behind the lens in this case. If we go and we look at them, we will see that we have three different types of lenses, and that pertains to the shape that we have. The first type would be one where it bulges on both sides, which is known as a double convex. If you have a lens that has got a flat side and one side bulging, it is called a plano for flat convex lens. And then the last type, which we have in most glasses that people wear, that would be a concavo convex lens, which means it's a double bulging side over here. What is important to remember is that when we look at the lens, at least one part of the lens would be thicker than the other one. So with a convex lens, the center part is thicker than the top part. If you look at the ray diagram over here, you would see that the light rays are converged. In other words, they meet at a point beyond the lens. And that is the main characteristic of a converging lens. The second type of lens is a diverging or concave lens. Now, the function of a concave or a diverging lens is to spread out the rays. They are most commonly found as double concave lenses, as seen over here in the sketch. Now, this is a double concave lens. The one over here with the flat side is called a plano concave lens. And the last one, which is a double concave lens over here, is called a convexo concave lens. As you can see on the diagram, the lights all enter parallel into the lens, and after the lens they split up. Now, these diverging rays do not meet again after the lens. So the purpose of this particular lens is to split them up. Now, the images that are formed by each of these lenses have their own characteristics and their own properties that we're going to investigate. Let's look at those. Now, some of the terms that you need to know for the diagrams over here would refer to the principal axis. Some textbooks would refer to this as a P and an A for principal and axis. We are going to use the abbreviations X and Y to indicate the principal axis. The principal axis is basically a horizontal line from which we refer to when we do our sketch. You will also see that over here we have a dotted line that represents the lens. In this case, you will see that we've got a convex lens. Now, the center of the lens that is situated on top of the principal axis is called the optical center, and we use the symbol O to denote that. You will also see that beyond my lens, I have got a point which is labeled as F. That refers to your primary focal point. Those of you that have played with magnifying glasses would know that if you sit and let the sun shine through the magnifying glass, you will move it to a certain distance, and at a specific point, the sunlight will make a small pinpoint. That is the focal point of a magnifying glass. In the lab, we can simulate the same experiment by putting a lens in a lens holder and allowing light to shine through the lens, and then we move a screen beyond the lens. When we get a small focal point where all the light is concentrated, we can take the measurement from there, and that would give us our focal point for that particular lens. Now, the focal point is found beyond the lens as well as in front of the lens. And this focal point is always the same distance, so it is a constant value beyond and in front of the lens. Although the focal point differs for different lenses, for each lens it will be exactly the same. Now, we also look at a point that is called double the focal point, and that is basically a doubling up of this distance. So this would be labeled as f, and if I carry on along my primary axis, the same distance over there would be found as 2f. Remember that this extends to the other side over here as well, where I would have f and 2f. Now, f and 2f, or your primary and your secondary focal points, are only used as a reference to help us determine what the image would look like if it were to be formed by the lens. The other important information over here is the primary focus, or the focal point as I mentioned over there, and then the focal length. Now, the focal length is the distance between your primary focal point and the lens. And as I mentioned, it is the same in both directions for each lens. Images that are formed by a convex lens have certain characteristics. Now, first of all, we need to go and look at the position of these images. As I mentioned, we use your primary focal point and your secondary focal point to determine where the object will be placed, and that will help us determine where the image will be formed after the lens. The object will be placed on one side of the lens. Remember that light passes through in both directions of the lens, so there is no front and back. You only refer to the point where you've placed your object, and then the image would form on the other side depending on the placement. As the object moves closer to the lens, you would notice that the image moves further and further away on the other side of the lens. Here is a brief summary of some of the characteristics that we can look for. We are going to bring these into context with diagrams in a short while. If my object is placed further than 2f, your secondary focal point, so it is far away, that would be similar to you looking at a tree across the road. Then we notice that your image will be formed between f and 2f on the lens. All objects would appear to be smaller or diminished. The images that are formed when an object is placed beyond 2f would be smaller, as well as real images. The term real image refers to an image that can be projected onto a screen. Please also note that all real images are inverted. Although we don't see things upside down, the image that is formed on your eye at the back of the retina is an upside down image. Your brain has the capacity to invert that image again so that you see things the right way up. If we go and look further through here, we see that objects that are placed at 2f will form an image at 2f, and that means that the image will be formed, and that image will be the same size as the object. Now, if you want to look at some practical applications over here, this would be a classic example of how the eye works. And if you go and you look at objects placed at 2f and the images forming at 2f, this would be an example of a photocopier. Now, photocopiers work with lenses that can increase or diminish the size of the object that is being photocopied when the image is formed, but mostly photocopiers are used to create an exact image of the original object. If the object is placed between f and 2f, the position would be further than 2f, so it moves further away from the lens. These images are all enlarged. An example of this would be a magnifying glass that helps you to see a bigger image if you look at something really small. Also note over here that again we have a real and inverted image. It is the eye that turns the image the right way around if you are using a magnifying lens. The last two, if the object is placed at F, or if it's placed at F, no image will be formed, and then if it is placed between F and the lens, we see that the image is enlarged, but this time it is going to be a virtual image that will stand up. Another word for erect over here would be upright. Let's have a look at the diagrams. Now remember the information that we looked at previously, and we're going to incorporate those in the diagrams we look at. If we look at the first one over here, remember, here you have your F, your primary focal point, and 2F. And on this side you would have F, your primary focal point, and 2F, which is your secondary focal point. If your object is situated beyond 2F, it will form an image over here that is smaller or diminished and inverted or upside down. It is always a handy tip to go and change the colors if you go and you draw your object in your image. And generally we use an arrow to ease up the drawing of our sketches. If we look at the second one, remember over here your image was situated at 2F, or twice your primary, or twice your focal point. Here we have our primary focal point, and you will see that your image is also situated at twice your focal point. Please note over here that the size of your object and your image is exactly the same. If we move on to the third sketch over here, you will see that the image has now moved to be situated between 2F and F. And if I go and I look at my image that is formed, that was the object. If I look at the image that is formed, I now see that my image is beyond 2F and that my image is larger than my original object. The fourth scenario we had was where your object was placed exactly on your primary focal point. That means that as the light rays pass through here and they cut through your primary focal point on the other side of your lens, these rays never meet. They remain parallel to each other. That is exactly why there is no image that forms when your object is situated on F. If we go and we look at the last one, and this is the most tricky one, we note that if we place the object between F and the optical center, so between our primary focal point and our optical center, the light rays pass through the lens, but they never meet. If we then extend the light rays backwards, so there's your object, the blue one, the light rays pass through your lens, and as we extend them backwards, at some point the light rays cross each other. At the point where they cross each other, that is where your image will be formed. We see that this image is enlarged, that it has the same orientation as the object that we look at, and this is an example of how a magnifying glass will work. Let's just go and look at the previous slide. I think, I definitely gave you the wrong information over here. This is not an example of a magnifying glass. The magnifying glass would be over here for the fifth scenario where it is situated between F and the focal point. If we move on to the next slide, we're going to look over here at magnification. Now the term magnification refers to the enlargement or the reducing of the image when we go and we look at an object through the lens. Because magnification is a ratio that we work with, there is no unit when we deal with magnification. There are two possible formulas that you could use. You could compare the size of the image over the size of the object, or we could go and look at the distance that the image lies from the lens to the object, the distance that the object lies from the lens. An easy way to remember, because this is not a standard formula that will appear on your formula sheet, is that I comes before O in the alphabet. And therefore your image would be at the top. So all the information on your image would be on top of the information for your object. Please make sure, if you decide to use the size of the image, then you must use the size of the object. You will score no marks if you use the size of the image, but the distance of the object from the lens. The comparison must be equal in terms of the distances that you work with. So it's either the size that you compare or the distances that are compared. If we look over here, as I said, magnification is a ratio and therefore has no unit. It is important to remember the following. If your magnification is greater than 1, then it means that your image was enlarged. So your image would be larger than the object. If your magnification works out to be smaller than 1, then that means that your image is going to be smaller, or your image is reduced. Now, what would happen if your magnification is equal to 1? Well, logically, if your object and your image are the same size, no magnification has taken place, and therefore your image or your magnification calculation would give you an answer that is equal to 1. So in this case, my size of my image is equal to that of my object. These are short calculations, but they're easy to score marks from. So make sure that you know exactly which measurements to take when you go and you measure these distances in order to go and calculate your magnification. Next, we're going to look at a comparison between the camera and the eye. Now, I know we all live in a digital age and most of us work with digital cameras. But if we go and we look at the more traditional camera, we see that there are several similarities between the traditional camera and the eye. Both of them use lenses. Your eye has got a cornea and a curvature of the eye that allows light to be bent as it goes through the lens into the back of the eye. So if we go and we look at the sketches that are provided over here, we can go and look at the comparison. If you look at the eye over here, we all know that the eye has got an iris. Now that is the colorful section that we have in our eyes. Each person has a different color, which is genetic, but in essence, it is a muscle that contracts or relaxes to allow more or less light to come into your eye. On a camera, that would be the function of the diaphragm that opens and closes the lens to allow more light in or less light, depending on the exposure. Also over here on the eye, you will notice that when the image or the light from your object goes through the lens of the eye to form an image, it is formed at the back of the eye, and it is formed over here on what is called the retina. Now the retina has got very photosensitive enzymes at the back, and these then react to the light that comes through the lens and through the iris, and it decodes that information to give you an image of what you are looking at. It is possible to damage the retina. If you were to look into the sunlight directly without eye protection, you would incur what we call sunburns at the back of your eye. That basically means that the sunlight burns the retina and those cells die. These cells cannot be regenerated, and if you were to look into the sun directly, it would create sunspots, and that could ultimately lead to blindness. So it's definitely something that none of us should do. Now in the camera, we have photographic film that takes over the same function as the retina would on the eye. Now this photographic film is light sensitive, and an image is formed on the film when exposed to light. If we go and we look at the brief summary that we gave you just in conclusion, we will see that both the eye and the lens contain a convex lens. Now if we the camera has got photographic film and the eye has got the light sensitive layer of nerve endings, which is known as the retina. The camera is blackened on the inside to absorb any light that goes into the camera. Now we find that beyond the retina, we have got a black lining in the eye that does serves the same purpose. If you were to look into someone's eye, you would have the iris, which is the colorful part, and then you would see the black of a person's eye. Now, if you look into someone's eyes and they had just come in from the outside, you would notice that this black dot in the eye is very small. That is because the iris has closed or contracted because of the high exposure to sunlight. And because the eye does not need that much light, it contracts and closes off, so only a small amount of light would enter the eye. If you were to look at the same person's eyes after they had come out of a dark room, you would notice that the iris has retracted, and it's a very thin layer of color that is situated around the black pupil. Now, that is an indication that the iris has opened up to allow a lot more light to come through so that the eye can see the images that are formed. The last characteristic over here is that apart from the light that reaches the film through the camera shutters that open and close and your eye, that is the iris, we also look at the fact that when objects are moved closer to or further from the lens, that would definitely affect the apparent size of the image that is formed. If I put my hand close to my face, my hand would appear the same size that it actually is. The further I move my hand, the smaller it would become. In the same sense, if I use a camera and I'm photographing objects that are far away, it would be a small object that I look at. But the camera has the ability to accommodate it with a lens that you can magnify the object and it would appear closer. Now on the camera, that is done manually through a lens. Your eye does that through muscles that contract and relax and changes the shape of the lens of the eye. That would help you to focus on the image depending on whether it is close by or further away. Next, we're going to look at defects of vision. Now, there are 4 different defects that we investigate and that can be corrected using lenses. Now, these lenses come in the form of contacts, or they could be glasses that the person would wear. The first 2 are the most common, and they are referred to as short-sightedness, or the ability to only see things that are close by. If you were a short-sighted person, you would have difficulty looking at a person standing on the other side of the road because the image would be blurred and you could not see very clearly. Now, to correct short-sightedness, we use a concave lens. Now, the purpose for this, if you go and look over here at the defect, let's just use a darker color. If that is the object that you are looking at and the light rays pass through the lens of the eye, we would notice that these light rays converge. They join up together in front of the retina. That means that no clear image is formed on the retina. Because we need to now try and bend the rays so that they take longer to converge to form an image, we insert over here a concave lens. Remember that the concave lens, as the light rays pass through it, bends them out slightly. By the time they reach the lens of the eye, they are bent back together and a proper image is formed on the retina so that the person can clearly see the object that they were looking at. The second type is called long-sightedness. Now, long-sightedness, also referred to as far-sightedness, is exactly the opposite to nearsightedness. A person that is long-sighted would be able to see very well at a long distance. They would see their friends across the road and wave because they know exactly who they are. But give them a piece of paper with writing on it and they would not be able to read that to you because the images are not clear. Now, the reason for this is the following. As the light rays pass through the lens as they come from the object, the lens is not round enough, so the light rays over here don't bend to converge in front of the retina. So no image is formed. The only way to correct this is by adding in a lens in front that pulls these rays closer together before it reaches the lens of the eye. And then as they pass through the lens of the eye, they can converge and a clear image is formed over here. Now remember, when you go and you study this, you must make sure that you are able to tell us what the eye problem is, as well as what causes it. So it is either because the lens is too round or the lens is too flat. It could also be due to the shape of the eyeball that the person has a sight problem. Then lastly, you need to be able to identify the correct type of lens that is used to correct such an eye problem. The third eye problem that we look at is that of astigmatation. Now, when we look at astigmatation or astigmatism, the problem lies with the lens itself. Now, instead of being too flat or too rounded, the lens has an irregular shape. So where it would normally have a smooth shape, a person that suffers from astigmatation would have a lens that has got ridges in it. Now, those ridges causes the person to see things clearly in one plane but not in another. Now, when I'm talking about planes, I'm talking about horizontal lines or vertical lines. If you have astigmatation, you might see horizontal lines perfectly, but the moment you bring in vertical lines, things start getting a little bit blurry. Or the opposite could be true. You would be able to see vertical lines perfectly, but anything horizontal could be blurry. It is very difficult to correct this eye problem using contact lenses. So most of the time, the person suffering from astigmatism uses a pair of glasses which has a cylindrical lens. So over there, when I'm talking about a cylindrical lens, that is a cylinder, and if I go and I look at the glasses, it would be a flat glass that has got an equal distribution over there, so the entire lens is thicker. Please note it's not like the convex or the diverging lens where it bends out and it comes in. It is more cylindrical shape, only there to help the bending of the light rays. The last one is loss of accommodation. Now, this is generally the one that our grandmothers and grandfathers, moms and dads suffer from. As we get older, the muscle in the eye starts to relax, and the muscle, through years of usage, does not stretch as well, and it doesn't contract as well anymore. That leads to the problem that you can look at objects that are far away, because that means that the muscle has to relax. But the moment the objects come closer by, this muscle has to tense up. And because the muscle can't tense that well anymore, the lens cannot be changed. So the shape of the lens stays pretty much the same. Now, the only way to overcome this is to have a pair of glasses for looking far away and a pair of glasses when you look near. A lot of older people use bifocals, which is basically a pair of glasses that will allow you to look far away, and at the bottom, as you look down to read, it will have a second section that is designed especially for reading. Unfortunately, there is very little that can be done about this, as this comes with old age and overuse of the eye. But one of the things that we can do while we are still young is to make sure that when we read, we keep the piece of paper roughly a ruler's length from our eye. So that is about 30 centimeters from your eye to the piece of paper. That allows the muscles not to stress too much, so they don't contract that much. And over years, they don't get used so much that the muscle loses its ability to contract and stretch. Next, we're going to look at telescopes. Now, telescopes refer to the use of lenses in our everyday life. Most telescopes are used in the research facilities, where people use them in a lab, where they look at biological specimens, they look at blood and all sorts of gooey stuff that I don't particularly like because I don't do biology. The other usage of telescopes would be where we look at celestial bodies. So if I go and I look at stars or universes that are far from us, I would use a telescope. A telescope is defined as an instrument that is used to magnify distant objects. They come in different shapes and sizes, and some of them are small enough to fit in your pocket, while others are the size of rooms. We look at two specific types of telescopes. The first type is a refractor telescope. Now, refractor telescopes uses lenses, whereby light passes through the lens and the light rays are then refracted. Now, this refraction causes the light rays to bend, and images are formed beyond the lens. This allows the images to be enlarged so that they can be viewed either on a screen or on a computer screen like this, or the person can look at them through an eyepiece. The second type of lens is a reflector telescope. Reflector telescopes uses mirrors, and they use the ability of light to be reflected off smooth surfaces. Now, instead of the light being gathered through the lens, the mirrors are used because it is easier to make a mirror that is accurate. Making a lens means that you need to have very accurate measurements, and that lens has to be polished, and most of this is done by hand. If you use a mirror telescope, it is easy to design a machine that would get exactly the right curvature of your mirror, and to just make sure that it is a reflective surface. The largest and most powerful reflecting telescope that we have in South Africa is situated in Sutherland in the Northern Cape. And this telescope is known as the SALT telescope, which stands for the South African Large Telescope. Now it is situated in the Northern Cape because, as we know, the Northern Cape does not have a high population like, for instance, Gauteng or the Western Cape. Because there are not that many people that live in the Northern Cape, light pollution does not play such a big role. Light pollution refers to the light that reflects off the cities with all its millions of lights and cars that move at night. So there's no light that reflects up from the earth, which means that the light that come from the stars and the sun and all sorts of other heavenly bodies can then be seen clearly when looked through the telescope. Now this SALT telescope is a mirror telescope or a reflective telescope over here. And it is built by using large numbers of hexagonal mirrors. So what they have done is they've taken mirrors that have 6 sides, they have joined them together, similar to a beehive, and they've made a very large mirror that has a diameter over here of 11 meters. Now that would fit easily into a room, and that is then used to collect the light, and the light is then reflected onto a screen, and they can do research from there. Then we also look at the compound microscope. Now, the compound microscope, these refer to the ones that are used in the lab where research is done. Telescopes are generally used to look at celestial bodies that are far away, and the microscope is used to look at very small objects that are inside rooms, and that would be testing blood or any type of other sample. Now, they consist of 2 lenses that both have very short focal lengths. Now remember, the focal length refers to the distance between the lens and the primary focal point. They are mounted on the same principal axis. That means if we go and look at the diagram over here, that you would have 2 lenses. There's your first lens and there's your second lens. Now the first lens is referred to as the objective, and the second one would be the eyepiece. Now, if I can give you a very rough sketch over here of such a microscope, they are generally situated where you've got a light source over here, so you'd have your light bulb that gives light, and you have your first lens that is situated close to the specimen. The second one at the top, that is the one that you would be looking through. That is an eye. And as the light would then come through the glass plate over here, it would shine through the specimen, and the light would go through the first lens. Let's put that in a different color. So the light would come through the first lens where it would be refracted. It would create an image. That image would act as the object for the second lens. So if we go back to the diagram over here, you would see you have your object. It passes through the first lens and it creates an image. This image then acts as the object for your second lens, and it will create a virtual image over here that can be seen by the person on the other side. So when you look from this side, you are actually looking at a secondary image that is formed that is highly enlarged. For the purpose of the exam, it is just important that you can differentiate between telescopes and microscopes, and that you are also able to explain to us what is the difference between a compound microscope and an electron microscope. Now, the electron microscope does not use lenses. For the electron microscope, they use magnets. Electron microscope. All right, so instead of lenses, strong magnets are used. Now these strong magnets work together with an electrical or charged particles. So charged particles, and in this case these charged particles would be electrons that reflect off the object and can then be viewed. On a screen. Now, the electron microscope is particularly handy if we have to look at minute objects that are so small that a normal compound microscope cannot pick up the images. Remember, as I said, for the exam, you need to be able to give us a comparison between the two, and there you go and focus on the differences that we have. The one uses lenses, your compound microscope, and your electron microscope would use strong magnets and electrons that are reflected off there. From here, we're going to move on to gravitational lenses. Now, gravitational lenses link up with your telescopes. They are basically lenses that focus again on celestial bodies. So if we go and we look up to the night skies, the gravitational lens picks up the light that come from other galaxies and other stars. When the light passes very big bodies, big planets, or they go past black holes, the light is actually bent. So if I can quickly show you a diagram over here with a very brief explanation, light travels in straight lines. But if I put a very big planet over here, the gravitational field around this planet, gravity, will affect the light as it passes over there. So instead of going straight, this light would then bend. Now, because the distance between other planets and the Earth is such a big distance, by the time we observe the light, it would appear to us as if the light rays that come from there are all moving in straight lines, and it comes straight from the object. Now, gravitational lenses help us to observe these bent lines and to go and accurately determine where other planets and other universes are situated. Again, for the exam, you need to be able to briefly explain and give us a short overview of how the gravitational lenses work. Question 1.2 asks us, what is meant by the focal point for a concave lens? Now remember, concave lens is the one that makes two hollow ends, or at least one hollow end. That is known as a diverging lens. Now, for a diverging lens, the light rays split up beyond the lens. So behind the lens, they split up. But if we were to pull those light rays back and we extend the diagram backwards, we would see that where they converge would be in front of the lens, and that is the focal point over there. So for a concave lens, it refers to the point in front of the lens, where, let's just correct that, where the light rays meet or converge. For the second one, they want to know, what does a focal mean for the convex lens? Now, for a convex lens, just so that you can compare over here, if that was my concave lens, the light rays would split up, but if I extended them backwards, they would meet at a point in front of the lens. So that would be my focal point, and this is then for your concave. So if I'm looking at over here my convex lens, I would see that if that is the lens and the light rays pass through there, they converge behind my lens. So for 1.2b over there, it would refer to the point beyond or behind the lens where the light rays meet. Okay, let's look at question 1.3. 1.3 asks us, where must an object be placed in relation to a convex lens in order to obtain a virtual image? If you think back to those examples that we looked at where we gave you the table with the different rules, the very last one spoke about the placement of an object so that it would give me a virtual image. Now remember, convex lenses all form real images except that specific one, and that is where the object is placed between F and the optical center. And when I'm talking about the optical center, I'm naturally, of course, referring to the lens. Okay, Let's look at question 1.4. Question 1.4 asks us, under what circumstances will no image be obtained when you're working with a convex lens? There's only one condition where this will happen, and that is if your image is situated on the focal point. We've all done this somewhere before in our lives, where you take your hand and you bring it closer to your face, and at some point you won't be able to see the hand anymore, it just becomes blurry. That is because you have placed an object on the focal length of your eye. If you move it further away, you would be able to see it. Bringing it closer to your eye, you're just going to poke your finger in your eye because the distance between the focal length and your eye is such a short distance. All right, so over here, what circumstances when the object is placed at the focal distance of the lens. Next question, 1.5. Which type of lens, they ask us for the type, can form only virtual images? Now, if we've just discussed the convex lens that can form real images as well as virtual images, we know that the other lens is the concave lens. Now, all concave lenses form virtual images. So our answer to the first question over here would be a concave or a diverging lens. There's a second question. They ask us to name two other characteristics of these images. Now, what do we know about virtual images? First of all of the virtual images that we looked at were upright. So they are upright in orientation. We also know that all virtual images are enlarged. And then I've mentioned all along that virtual images cannot be projected onto a screen, cannot be projected onto a screen. Right, something good to remember over here. If you go to the movie house to go watch a movie, the type of image that is formed over there as the movie reel runs behind you in the operator room, that type of lens forms a real image because there's a lens that reflects it onto the screen and there's a second lens that inverts it, so it turns it around so that the image is the right way around onto the screen. But what we have over there is an image that can be projected onto the screen, and that is what we talk about when we talk about a real image and the projection over there. Then lastly, we move over to question 1.6. I think this is the last question over here, where they ask us, where must an object be placed in relation to the convex lens so that we can have images that have the following orientation? Now, if I want my image to be enlarged, upright, and virtual, remember the other word for erect is upright. Now, if I want an image that has all of those characteristics, where would I place it? I would place my object between F and the lens. If I want my image to be real and diminished, diminished over here means smaller. Now remember, the further away my object is from my lens, the smaller the image that I'm going to see over here. So if I have an object over here, my image is going to be really small. As I bring my object closer, my image moves away as well, but my image is going to increase in size. So I might have a big object over here and a small image, and as I bring them closer together to the lens, my image will move away and it will get larger as my object gets closer over here. All right, so if I want it to be real and diminished, I will have it beyond 2f. Or beyond twice my focal length. If I want it to be real and enlarged, there I would place it between 2f and F. This one we all know. When I want it to be real and the same size as the object, then that is where it is exactly on 2F. And the last one they ask over here, if I want my object to be real and the minimum distance from the lens. Okay, so as close as possible to the lens. Remember what I just said, the further away, the closer to the lens it would be. So I'm again going to look at something that is beyond 2F. Let's move on to the next question. There's still a 1.7 over here. They ask us, or they tell us, that a projector lens is 50 millimeters from the film. If the screen is 2.5 meters from the projector, what will be the magnification? So this is almost the type of scenario that we're looking at. If this is my projector lens, and this is the distance from the film, so there's your film reel running from one reel onto another in a cinema. So it runs from the one over onto the other. There's my lens, the light shines through it, and there's my cinema screen. The one distance over here would be 50 millimeters, and this distance would be 2.5 meters. Now remember, if you want to work with magnification, everything has to be in the same unit. So it was going to be easier for us to convert millimeters into meters. So let's do our conversion first, and then we'll look at our magnification. To get millimeters into meters, I need to divide it by 1,000. And that will give me a distance of 0.05 meters. Now this distance is my object distance. So that is how far my object is from my lens. The second distance they gave us would have been our image distance. Now that is the distance that our image over here is situated from the lens, and that is given to us as 2.5 meters. When we calculate our magnification, remember that I is before O on the alphabet, magnification, and therefore when I go and write out my formula, it would be my image distance over the object distance. And we measure these distances from the lens. Remember what I said? This is not an equation that you're going to find in your formula sheet, so make sure that you know it and that you can use it when asked for it, either using the object distance and the image distance, or the size of the object and the size of the image. So we go and we substitute our values in here. The distance of the image from the screen is 2.5, and the image of my, or the distance of my object from the lens is going to be 0.05. My fractions aren't that good, so we're going to use the calculator, and we say 2.5 divided by 0.05. And we'll see that that gives us a value of 50. So the image that we see on the screen is 50 times larger than the actual object that we have on the film. And that is how it's possible to have such a small diagram on the film, and when you go and you look at your favorite actor, he fills up an entire screen in front of you. Question 1.8 tells us that a magnifying glass is held 20 millimeters from a stamp and it magnifies it 10 times. How far is the image from the magnifying glass? So if this was to be my stamp that I'm looking at, here's my magnifying glass. They tell me that the distance between the magnifying glass and my stamp over here is 20 millimeters. Now they tell us what the magnification is. So when we're going to work with our formula, it's not going to be distances or lengths that we substitute every time. We're going to start with our magnification. So we have our formula that says that our magnification, and here we don't have a choice. We must work with the length that is given to us. It is going to be the image distance from the lens over the object distance from the lens. So if we go and substitute our values in there, your magnification is equal to 10. The distance that the object is from the lens is given to us as 20 millimeters. Why am I not converting over here? Well, if I go and I calculate the distance at the top, it's going to be in exactly the same unit of measurement as my answer. So whether I use my answer or my distance over here in millimeters or in meters, it's going to give me an answer in the correct unit anyway. And that is then the image distance from the lens. So image distance is going to be 10 times the 20 millimeters, and it's going to give us an answer of 200 millimeters. If you really want to give the answer in an SI unit, or they tell you to give it in an SI unit, you could say that therefore the image is formed 0.2 meters beyond the lens. All right, nice fully answered question over here. The next question is question 2. Now I want us to pay close attention to question 2 because it tells us to draw an accurate ray diagram. There's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind when you go and draw such an accurate ray diagram. So I'm going to go through this nice and slowly, and I'm going to hammer on certain things that are very important to you guys to remember throughout this. Now the first thing to start off with is to go and identify the important information. They tell me that my object is 50 millimeters high. Now 50 millimeters is 5 centimeters, which is a fairly nice, decent size if you are going to go and draw your object on a piece of paper. Sometimes they will provide you with graph paper. Then please make sure that you use the correct scale when you go and you do your drawings. Next, they tell us that our object is placed at a distance of 50 millimeters from a convex lens. It is important that we pay attention to the type of lens as well as the distance that your object is placed away from the lens. The type of lens will tell us exactly how the image will be formed. The last important piece of information over here is where they tell us that the focal length or the focal distance is 15 millimeters. So we're going to go to our graph paper and we're going to look at the information that we substitute in here. Now when you start off, whether it is on graph paper or lined paper, is to always start off with your primary axis. I'm going to use the abbreviation PA to indicate my primary axis. Now remember, on your primary axis, that is going to be where you're going to place your lens. So if I go and I place my lens over here, I'm going to place it halfway between those two, and I'm going to draw it in over here. Now your lens is a straight vertical line. When you draw a convex lens, remember that for a convex lens, the light rays join up together. So we indicate that with arrows that point together. So instead of trying to go and draw the entire lens over there, all we do is we go and we draw the arrowheads at the top and the bottom, and we indicate that the arrows join up. If they did ask you for a converging lens, you would draw those arrows, sorry, not a converging, a diverging lens. You would draw the arrows as such. Because the light rays bend apart, you would draw your arrow with the ends of the arrowheads pointing away from each other. If you do this, it is understood as a lens, and you don't have to worry and sit there and try and draw the perfect lens, because a lot of time gets wasted in trying to draw the perfect lens over there. All right, back to our diagram. So now we've indicated our primary axis, we've indicated our lens. The next important thing to indicate over here is our optical center. Now I am going to use a scale drawing. When I'm talking about a scale drawing, it refers to the fact that I'm going to use blocks to represent specific distances. Due to the nature of the image that we're going to form over here, I am not going to use the same scale for my vertical and my horizontal blocks or my horizontal distances. So please pay attention to what I'm doing over here. And when you are going to use a scale in the exam, please make sure that you write it down so that the examiner can see what scale you are using. Now, over here, for my height, I'm going to say that one block is equal to 10 millimeters. So if my object is 50 millimeters high, it means I'm going to work with 5 blocks. Secondly, if I go and I look at my length, then I'm going to say that one block is equal to 5 millimeters. Now the reason why I do this is if I use it as 10 millimeters across as well, then my sketch over here becomes all crunched up and condensed. So I want to make it a nice sizable image so that you guys can see the drawing that I've done over here. All right, let's go and look at the other information. Let's just go back over here and go and see what our focal lengths are. They tell us that the focal length is 15 millimeters. So I'm going to indicate that for you in orange. Remember that the length, one block is 5 millimeters, so 1, 2, 3, that is going to be my first focal length or my primary focal length, and then I count 1, 2, 3 again. That is then going to be my secondary focal length. So I label that as 2F and F, and the focal points or the focal lengths exist on the other side as well. So 1, 2, 3, that is going to be F, and 1, 2, 3, that is going to be 2F, situated over there. Very important that you indicate them. You would notice over here that I've done some of them below the line, that one I did above the line. It doesn't really matter, just for consistency, I'll make sure that I put all of them below the line. All right, now the next important thing over here is to go and find the actual distance that my object is situated from the lens. So I'm going to draw my object over here in green. They tell us that the object is situated 50 millimeters in front of my lens. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. If I go and I count that, maybe I need to use the right marker. Let's just undo that and just put down the point. So that was 30, 40, 50. So there we go. That is where I'm going to situate my object. They now tell me that my object has a size of 50 millimeters. Remember, I'm working over here with the height of the block, and the height of the block, I said one block is going to be 10 millimeters. So if it is 50 millimeters in length, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that is where I'm going to go and draw my object. Draw the object properly as an arrow. It just works easiest if you go and you work from there. All right, we've done the object. You can label it over here as your object. We've got the optical center, we've got the primary axis, and we've indicated the various focal, primary and secondary focal points. Now the big thing comes in drawing the path of the lenses. So I want you to pay close attention. We're only going to draw two light rays that come from the object as it goes through the lens. I might just want to extend my lens over here so that I don't get caught up with all sorts of arrowheads over there. I'm going to use the color, we're kind of limited. All right, let's use the color green again. Now, as the first light ray passes from the tip of my object, it is going to go towards the center of my lens. Now, this light ray runs parallel to my primary axis. So in other words, it is the same distance throughout. If I measure the distance here, it would be 50 millimeters, and if I measure it on my lens, it would be 50 millimeters as well. From the lens, this light ray is going to bend, and it's going to pass through my first focal point. So I'm now going to, from there, pass it through my first focal point, and I'm going to extend this line downwards as far as possible. Let's just move our screen a little bit. So you'll see that it passes through my focal point over there. So that is your first light ray that we looked at. Now the second light ray will also go from the tip of my object. So if I go and I look at my second light ray, it is going to start over here, but this light ray will pass through the center of my lens. So it's going to pass through the optical center, and I'm going to extend it beyond my lens until it reaches or crosses my first light ray that I drew. Remember that you must include over here arrows to show us in which direction the light is moving. So if I now look over here, I see the point where these two light rays meet. And at that exact point, that is where my image will be forming. So if I go and I draw my image so that it lies with the tip of the arrowhead over there, that is exactly going to be the point where my image forms. I just want to make it a nice decent sketch, so I'm going to use these ones over here. So if I draw it up from there to there, we will see that that is where our image is formed. So let's cover that in pink again so we can see it nicely. All right, so it's going to be situated over there. If this is my object, this is going to be my image. Now from here, you've done an accurate ray diagram. The only thing that you now need to go and add in that is extra or optional over here would be your focal distances. A lot of examiners like to see that you include your measurements over here. So it is always a good thing for you to go and add your measurements. We'll stick to pink. We know that our object over here was 50 millimeters high. We know that this distance was given to us as 50 millimeters in length. Our focal points were given to us as 15 millimeters. You only need to include the first one because the secondary focal point is going to be the same distance. Now you're going to take your ruler and you're going to measure the distance from your optical center towards your image. In our case, because I've used the graph paper, I can go and count the number of blocks. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. Remember, one block is equal to 5 millimeters, so that tells me that this image is formed 20 millimeters from my optical center. If I go and I use my scale, again I'm going to use the number of blocks. Looking at my height, one block is equal to 10 millimeters, and I see that I've got 1, 2, that is going to give me 20 millimeters in height for my image that is formed. In this diagram, you have now included all the information that your examiner might require. You've included labeling for your axis, you've included the labeling for your focal points, your primary as well as your secondary focal point. You've included your lens as well as the labeling for the optical center. You've drawn your object to scale and you have labeled your object. You've drawn your image to scale and you have labeled your image. Your ray diagrams, the light rays that move from your object, the first one moves parallel and the second one goes through the optical center until the point where they cross each other. You've also included the distances that the image is from the optical center as well as the image from the optical center, and over here you've included the height of your object and your image. So that is all the information. We can now go and answer questions 2.2 and 2.3. They want us to go and measure the size of the image. Again, that is easy because we have used graph paper. We can go back and say, okay, two blocks. One block is equal to 10 millimeters. So therefore, 2 blocks is going to equal 20 millimeters. And that is then the size of my image that is formed. 2.3 asks us to go and measure the distance of the image from the optical center of the lens. Because we have used graph paper, it is a lot easier. If you did not use graph paper and you used line paper, make sure that the pencil that you make your sketch with has a very sharp point so that you can make accurate drawings and also go and make accurate measurements. Because of the graph paper, it's easy for us. We count 4 blocks across. And remember, 1 block in this case is equal to 5 millimeters because we're working with the length from the distance. And because I have 4 blocks, I would see that that distance is going to be equal to 20 millimeters from the optical center. Moving on to question 2.4. Now, with such a sketch, it is expected for them to go and ask us for the magnification. In this case, you have a choice. You can choose to work with the size of the object and the size of the image, or you can choose to work with the length that the object and the image is situated from the optical center. Just because we have worked with calculating magnification based on the length from the optical center, I'm going to opt to go for the size of the object and the image in comparison. So if we go and we look over here, next slide, you're going to say that the magnification is equal to the size of my image over the size of my object. The size of my image, we just worked that out. That was 10 millimeters. Let me just double check. I don't want to give you the wrong information. 20 millimeters. So you get that from your measurement, and the size of your object was given to us as 50 millimeters. Now, do a quick ratio over there, cancel out the zeros, 2 over 5, and that is going to give you a magnification of 0,4. Remember, if your magnification is smaller than 1, it means that your image has been reduced. And you can double check your answer, because if you go and you look at your drawing, you would see that your image is in fact smaller than the object was. Question 2.5. They want to know what is the nature of the image. Now, the nature of the image refers to the characteristics of it. And we can go and list 3 of them, because we can also see that the mark allocation over here is 3. So the first thing that we notice is that our image was reduced. Image is reduced. You can use any one of the other words that would mean exactly the same. You could say your image is smaller. You could say that the image is diminished, as long as we see that you understand that it reduces in size. The second thing, your image was inverted. So the image over here is inverted, or you could say upside down. And then lastly, we know that this is a real image. Okay, 3 characteristics that are typical of an image that is formed if my object is placed beyond 2f. Let's move on to question 3. I see that we're dealing over here with a magnifying glass. Now remember, magnifying glass are excellent toys. It's very handy. You can use it to look at objects that are really small, but they can be dangerous. If you sit and you play with a magnifying glass and you get the focal point and you leave it burning onto a point, you could start a fire. Now, we don't want to do that, because we know that fires are always dangerous, and it could lead to the loss of either the life of a loved one or animals. So please refrain from doing such things. And if you see a younger brother or sister, pull them back and rather teach them how to use a magnifying glass properly, instead of using it to be naughty or to cause trouble. Now, tell us that we're looking at a diagram. So let's just move on to the diagram so we can all see what they're talking about. This is our magnifying glass over here. Now note that it is a convex lens, and here is the eye. So they tell us that the image is situated, or the object is situated over here. I'm just going to highlight it in a different color so that we can all see it. So there is my object. And my object is situated in front of the magnifying glass. So let's go back to the first part of the question and see what they want to know from us. So they tell us we have a magnifying glass, and as you've seen in the diagram, it shows a lens that is used as a magnifying glass with the position of the eye as well as the position of the object standing at point O. We've indicated that. Now they want to know what type of lens is shown in the diagram. If you think back to the diagram we just looked at, you would notice or remember that I told you that it was a convex lens. You can also call it a converging lens because it converges or brings the light rays together. Both of these mean exactly the same, and you would get the correct mark for that. The next question asks us, 2 points are marked as F. What are these points? So if we go and we look at our diagram, we see that the 2 points that they refer to would be the F over here and F over there. Remember, those 2 points refer to the primary focal point, or the focal distance that we have for our lens. So if we go back, we can go and answer question 3A, number 2. These 2 points are referred to as the primary focal points. Right, they ask us about the points. That is why I have not mentioned that it is the primary or the focal distance, because the question asks for the points, and therefore I tell them that it is the primary focal point. If they were referring to 2F, which is the second one, primary refers to first, secondary refers to the second, so 2F would have been the second focal point. All right, the next question. What is the name of the straight line which goes through point F, through point L, and that is the center of the lens, and then through point F on the other side? So if we go and we look at our diagram over here, they are referring to this line. They're talking about this line that runs through F. There's L, which is our lens, and F on this side. So it runs through all 3 of those points. Of course, yes, I'm sure you all remembered that that line is called the primary axis. Right, so that is the reference point from which we are working when we go and draw our sketch. Now we're back onto the diagram, and the 4th question over here asks us, on the diagram, use a ruler to construct accurately. So again, we're going to look at a diagram that we have to draw, the position of the image. So they are concerned in finding out where the image would be if I use a magnifying glass. You should show your construct, or show how you construct your ray diagram and how the light appears to come from the image to the center of the eye. Remember, light always comes from the object. It does not shoot out of the eye and allows you to see it. So the light rays will always move towards the eye. So let's just clear over here so you can have a nicely constructed sketch. And they ask us to go and construct our ray diagram. I'm going to use green again. Remember, the very first diagram that we draw would go from the tip over here of my object, parallel to my primary axis, towards the center of my lens. From the center of my lens, this ray or light ray would pass through my focal point, and I would extend it towards my eye. The second ray diagram that we draw, we're going to stick to green, is also going to start from the tip of my object. It is going to go through the optical center over here, and it is going to go towards my eye. But now you would look very concerned I would be very concerned if I looked at this, because these 2 light rays don't seem to be meeting each other. So that tells me that no image is formed. Important for you to observe over here is the following. These 2 light rays are not parallel to each other. That means if I were to extend them backwards, I would be able to find an image on the other side of the lens, which is exactly what the magnifying glass does. So I'm just going to draw them using a dotted line, and we're going to start over here, and I'm going to draw it in a straight line up, and I'm going to, from my lens over there, draw it in a straight line up. Now, where these 2 dotted lines meet, that is going to be where I'm going to form my image. Now, unfortunately, the lines are a little bit thick, but we can safely say that my image will be forming over here. Now, the point where they cross, because the light rays moved from the tip of my object, so that was the tip of my arrow, I go and I draw the tip of the arrow, because the lights, the information that these light rays carry with them refer to the tip that I've drawn over there. So this is going to be my object. Over here I have my image. The question asked specifically that we go and we indicate over here how the light appears to come from this image to the center of the eye. So we would go and draw the arrows indicating the direction in which the light rays travel. Please note over here that I don't go and draw arrows on the light rays that I've extended backwards. I did use dotted lines. It makes it easier. I used different color because that is what I had available, but you can go use different color if you want to, but dotted lines are generally the main thing that we use over there to show that we have extended it backwards. I do not include arrowheads over here in the extended light rays as they go backwards. Then where they join, I go and I draw my image over there, and I can see that in this case my image is larger than the object, so it is enlarged. It is upright, it has the same orientation as my object, and it is a virtual image. In other words, I cannot project it onto a screen. Right, let's see if there's another question over here. Still on magnifying glasses. The diagram now tells us that the image is virtual. They ask us to explain over here what is a virtual image. We've got several characteristics that belong to the virtual image, okay? But the virtual image is basically an image that cannot be projected onto a screen. So that is what we'll have for our answer. So the virtual image is enlarged and upright and cannot be projected onto a screen. All right, let's move on and see if question 3's got more in store for us. Now, we move on to question 4. Question 4, by the look at it, appears to be a question comparing the camera and the eye. All right, so remember what I said. We are living in a digital age. Most of the cameras we work with are digital cameras, but you still need to know the comparison between the eye and the camera. Easy marks, most of these things can be done in table form, and if you study the one, then you would know that the other one has got small changes but similar characteristics. So let's answer the questions over here. 4.1 asks us, what controls the amount of light that enters the lens of the camera? Now in the camera, that would be the diaphragm that is adjusted over there. So our answer over here would be the diaphragm. And I really hope my spelling is correct over there. And then also in the human eye, that would be the iris of the eye. Okay, moving on. Question 4.2 asks us, if an object moves closer to a camera and an eye, which changes must occur in the camera? Now, if I'm holding a camera and I'm about to take a photo and that object comes too close, the image is going to become blurry. So what do I need to do? I need to go and adjust my lens so that I can see better. So for the camera, you would have to go and adjust the lens of the camera. Now, fortunately for people like me, some cameras have that autocorrect, so if you bring the image or the object closer, immediately it adjusts itself so that you see a clear image over there. Some of us are not blessed with photographic talent, and I definitely count myself as one of them. Now, in the eye, what is done to make sure that the image remains sharply in focus? We find that the muscles working on the lens of the camera causes the lens to round or to go flatter or to bulge out. So over here the muscles contract or relax to change the shape of the lens. I just want to mention over here, your eye has a lens that can change its shape. The camera does not have a lens that can change its shape. It's pretty much a fixed lens. So the only way that it can improve the image that is formed of the object is to move the lens further or closer. All right? And that is what is meant over here by the adjustment of the lens of the camera, so that the lens is further or closer from the focal point that you are looking at. Okay, next question. They ask us here to describe the similarity between the retina in the human eye and the film in the camera. Now, both the retina and the eye have one very important characteristic over here. They are photosensitive. Photo, coming from the Greek word referring to light. So the retina, as well as the photographic film over here, is light sensitive. So if they are exposed to light, an image will form over there. So that is going to be our first thing that we mention over here, is that both are photo, or if you struggle with a word, you can say light sensitive. Right, I'm not sure if there is a second similarity that we can have over there, apart from the fact that both the retina and the photographic film, in this case, would be situated behind the lens. Right, those are the similarities I can think of. So let's move on to the next one. Question 4.4 asks us to go and describe the objective and the ocular lenses and the function of each in the microscope and the telescope respectively. Now remember, the microscope is used in the lab. There we go and look at very small particles that can be enlarged. The telescope, on the other hand, is used outside to go and look at the heavenly bodies, the skies, the stars, the universes that are beyond. So for each one of these, they have an ocular and an objective, but they have different functions. So let's look at the microscope first. I'm just going to create space over here. So for a microscope, we know the following. Now, first of all, the objective, and I see it's worth 5 marks, so we're going to look for 5 points over here. The objective is closest to the object. The ocular is closest to the eye. So that's going to be the eyepiece through which you look. Third point over here. Now, both these lenses have very short focal points. So you can say that both lenses have short focal points. Our fourth point. Now, we are going to form an enlarged, inverted, and real image. So you can say over here that the image that is formed by the objective, just want to make sure, by the objective lens, is a real, inverted, and enlarged image. And the last thing that is very important over here, because it sets the microscope apart from the telescope, is the fact that the image that is formed becomes the object for the ocular lens. This image, let's name that the secondary image. This secondary image is enlarged even more. It is also inverted and real. Sorry, if I just think back to the sketch that we had, if that was your primary axis, there's your first lens, that is your object. It's going to form an image over here. That image is going to form the secondary image. So I'm incorrect over here. Let's just change that. That secondary image is enlarged, but it has the same orientation as the primary image. So let's just say that it is enlarged even more, but has the same orientation as the primary image. Okay. And if it has the same orientation as my primary image over there, that is my primary image, this is my secondary image, then this would mean that I have a virtual image. So a virtual image is then formed. All right, lots of information worth 5 points. We've listed them nicely in detail. I think we might have gone into a little bit more detail than necessary on the last 2 points, but now we need to just go and describe over here the function of the ocular and the objective in the telescope. You will see that it's only worth 2 marks, so hopefully a lot less writing, and we can go and look at the answer over there. So for the telescope, what do we know about the 2 lenses at the telescope? Well, the objective has one function. The objective is there to collect, so it collects light and condenses it. So as the light comes in, that's first lens over there collects all the light, it puts it together, and then the second lens is going to be the one that forms the image. So your ocular has the function of then magnifying, so the ocular magnifies the image that is formed. All right, so for your microscope, you've got 5 functions. If you go and you look at your telescope, only 2. It's a much simpler instrument, although it allows us to look at things that are further away compared to the microscope. Ladies and gents, if you've done all of that, then I can wish you only the best of luck for your exam. I hope that you all ace this section, because there's easy marks. Easy marks in your pocket mean that you do a lot better. And I hope to see you here again pretty soon on Mindset Extra. Thank you very much.